Welcome to Bandit's Keep. I'm Daniel. This week we want to cover, I'm by myself, a controversial subject. Maybe not controversial, I don't know. So I made a video a while back. I made a couple of videos about sandbox play, and it's one of those terms you see bounced around a lot. As I mentioned, sandbox, often in opposition or opposite to railroad. And one thing I've seen, not on just those two videos, but on my Discord server and other places, is people telling me that, in fact, players don't want a sandbox, and what they want is what's considered a railroad. Now, this I don't really agree with. And what they say, I'm not picking any particular quote, this is just a general vibe, a few facts that they put out there to make their point. One is that you start an adventure and you plop the players in a town and they don't do anything. They go to the tavern, they just role play with each other, they don't seek out adventure, they don't do whatever. 2, you put them on a quest and they don't seem that interested in it. They're kind of slacking off, they're not that into it. And 3, they don't set goals for their characters. And what's funny is a lot of times people who make that statement are also the ones that also make statements about how they don't like backstories. But maybe that's another video. Anyways, I think this is a really interesting conversation, and I think that I have hopefully some advice if you have players that are doing those things and, advice other than railroad them. But I think first we need to talk about what is exactly a railroad. Let's get some terms on the table. Now, these are going to be my definitions for this video. If you see it as something else, then perhaps say so in the comments. But I think a lot of times when you're having a conversation, people will be using the same terms in different ways, and then that's actually why you're not agreeing. Okay, so let's start off with a couple basic things. Railroad and sandbox. But actually, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to talk about what a railroad is, and I'm also going to talk about what is maybe the good version of it, which is a linear adventure. In fact, let's start there. So a linear adventure is an adventure where there is a destination right from the beginning. And this can be an adventure, which is how I generally would use it, or a campaign. That is to say, you might know, let's go The Hobbit, right? In The Hobbit, they know that their adventure is to travel to this location and still take back the gold from the dragon, right? This is the plan. There's no specific way. They have a map. They've got some supplies, they have their stuff, and they're going there, right? They're not going to suddenly be like, oh, you know what? There's something over here. Let's go that way. They're going to end up at the dragon. How they get there, what they do, that's up to them. But, that's where they're going. Now, isn't that a railroad? Well, a railroad to me, or railroading to me, is when you do not allow the player characters or the players to do anything but the adventure. That is to say, they want to go and take an excursion, let's say, into this dungeon that's on the way, and it's not part of the final quest, and somehow you stop them from doing it. And you can do it incredibly blatantly just by saying you can't do it, or you can just put things in their path that kind of maybe in world logic shouldn't be there to stop them. This can also be used, rolling back, to force an adventure. In a sense, you could say that Bilbo was railroaded because they kind of, boom, the dwarves all showed up with Gandalf and they kind of peer pressured him right into going. So that might have been a little bit, right? But not real, obviously. That was for the story. But you understand that this is the case. So if you look at it and you go, can we make a choice to not do this? And now when we're talking about this, again, you've got player buy-in, hopefully, before your campaign starts. That is to say that if you are going to run a linear campaign where you're going to start in this town, build up experience, and then fight a dragon, that should be kind of pitched, right? Bilbo knew when they came in with the contract, that's what they were doing, and then he chose to do it. And that's really what makes a linear adventure work. What doesn't work is when you pitch it as a sandbox, which I'll talk about in a second, and then all of a sudden it's like, no, this is the adventure you're taking, and you can't do anything else. That's when you get pushback from the players. This doesn't exactly answer the question of players don't want a sandbox, but let's jump into something else. Sandbox, and I'm going to talk about something else called open world. I know this term is used a lot in video games, which I am not familiar with, so it might be different there, but the way I would use it is like this. A sandbox is a place that the players not only can go anywhere and do anything, but their actions can affect and change the world. So your sandbox campaign is one where maybe you go 0 to hero and they build keeps and they do all these other things. It's not the linear campaign where they're going to defeat the dragon. It's the we're going to do what we want to set our own goals and to do this thing. An open world is a place where the player characters can do their own thing, but they're not necessarily going to be put in the position where they can make changes, like massive changes. So an example there might be a mega dungeon campaign, at least one that doesn't have factions, right? If you're running a mythic underworld mega dungeon, the player characters can't really change the dungeon, right? It's constantly changing around them. Their goal is just to get in there and get treasure, and it's fun and adventure-y, but they're not looking to change the dungeon, right? They're looking to, except for to take the loot. Maybe there might be parts of the dungeon where there's factions and they can make minor changes there. That would get it a little more into a sandbox. But in an open world, they can go anywhere they want in the dungeon. It's a massive dungeon, but they're not really ever going to change the dungeon. It will remain no matter what they do. So looking at it that way, we have a few different areas here, right? We've got what would be, I think a lot of DMs believe, the ultimate, which is the let the players do what they want, just drop them in sandbox, right? Players, do what you want. I've created this world. Do whatever you like. The other, which a lot of people like to do, is straight up linear. And those DMs that create those linear type campaigns are a little bit more likely to create a railroad where there's no choices. And you've got to be a little careful there. The sandbox campaign creator might actually be creating something that's not interesting, right? Because it's just like, here's a world. I created all kinds of cool lore. Figure it out. That's not necessarily interesting to all players. So how do we make it so that your players don't want to just be railroaded? There's going to be some players, of course, that will, right? Maybe they're a passive player. Maybe they're what we often call beer and pretzels. Maybe they just like to sit down with their friends. They don't really care. They've got their fighter or their magic user or their cleric. They're just going to follow along. In a sense, they don't really care. If you go, well, you can't go left because I need you to go right, they're just going to go, all right, their monsters to the right, I'll do it. Most players, I find, don't fall into that category, at least the ones that play all the time in regular campaigns. So we're going to focus on players that want some choice. So how do we really fire this up for them? Okay, before we do that, though, I have a sponsor this week. Me. I know I've mentioned this once before, but I don't think I do often enough, and people do ask me sometimes when I'm wearing these fun t-shirts, where'd you get it from? Well, I set up a little merch shop on Amazon, and I have Bandits Keep t-shirts, so if you are interested, I will put a link in the description below. All right, so I'm going to make a bold statement here. Here's my opinion. Most players want options, but many of them also want direction. And I think this here is the key. Now, they're getting that there's two reasons why they're like that. One is that they, especially at the beginning of a campaign, they don't know. I mean, it's easy to sit down and tell somebody you can do anything, but can we do anything? Can I do anything in this world? I mean, maybe eventually, but not right this second, right? I can't walk outside my house and get on a horse because there's no horse there. So sometimes players in the beginning of a campaign are feeling it out to see what the world feels like, and they're not sure what they can do. So that will actually hold them back a little bit. But they do want to make choices. I don't believe that they just want you to go, this is what you're doing. Maybe for a one-shot, but I think for a campaign, they don't really want that. The second part of this is players, especially if they're your friends, might want to do what they think you want them to do. And this is also a place where we have to be a little hesitant, right? Because they're going to look at you and go, oh, okay, in my case, Daniel, likes to run dungeons. So let's go to the dungeon because that's what Daniel likes. And in fact, I have a little story. When I have a relatively new player to my group, I have other players who played with me for years. And that new player had seen, I was talking to them before the game and I was like setting up my stuff. They were like, oh, what's in that folder? And I said, oh, I have a dungeon here you guys might go into. And then it was right after a big downtime. So they were all discussing what they were going to do. They had rumors they were figuring out. And then that player piped up and said, well, Daniel just created a dungeon, so that's what we should do. And one of the players I've played with more or less the longest said, Daniel doesn't care what we do. And that's right. And that is an actual statement of truth in my campaign. I make a lot of things because I don't care what they do. Now, this wasn't the beginning of the campaign, so they did have an idea of what they could possibly do, right? There was rumors, their characters had built up alliances, they had plans. So this, again, was a little bit of a different spot. We're talking about the beginning of a campaign. So how do I normally start a campaign? With a linear adventure almost always. If you just take your group and drop them into a village and say, okay, you're in a village. Again, they don't know. They can do anything. Well, can they? What's this village like? Do you want to spend multiple sessions of them just exploring the village and figuring out how much a horse costs and where the inn is? Maybe you do, but some players won't be interested in that. And that's when you get the players that are scratching their heads and checking their phones and not really paying attention because they want to get to it and they don't know how because the world is new to them. They can't just go, you know what, let's just go to the dungeon because they don't know that there's a dungeon. Now they've got to go through these steps of going, okay, let's find a dungeon, let's find a thing. So what do we do there? So one solution is rumors, right? I mean, you could do like, here's 4 options, or there's a board for adventurers to take little tags off, which I do not like. But that's my own personal thing. If you like that, go for it. To me, what you want to start with at the beginning of a campaign is a little bit of a linear push. You want to say, and again, this should be established in your, if you have a session 0 or if you're talking about things ahead of time, you can say, okay, you're a group of adventurers that have come to this region because you heard about a keep that has been deserted for 1,000 years, and underneath it, supposedly there are rich treasures. This keep is near the town of blah, blah, blah. You've traveled for this much time. You show up at the town. Okay, you're at the town. What do you do? Right? Now we know they have a goal. They've got a goal that we've established pre-campaign. I didn't just throw it at them. They all said, okay, I'll make characters that are into that. You're not going to get the character that's like, I have no interest in looting a crypt. If they do, that's on the player, right? If that's the player just not making a character that's proper for the campaign, which is probably another video, but you want to establish a little bit up front. So that's the easy part, right? Running a 1 or 2 session dungeon based around an idea that everybody agreed on before you start is not a sandbox. How do we open up the world? Side quests. Well, I don't really call them side quests, but I have one player that always goes, oh, side quest. Because what I do is while they are adventuring, I put out hooks for more and more adventures. It's not, let's take this tag off the door, off the board, go do the adventure, come back to town, let's get another one. That's not how I do it. They're going to this first area, and on the way, they meet a merchant on the road that was robbed. They see some movement in the hills. A dragon flies overhead. Things happen while they are moving around. They discover ancient rooms, but they discover ancient runes in the crypt they want to decipher. They find a magic sword that speaks to them and tells them that it wants to be returned to its homeland, which is someplace they've never heard of. All these things happen during the adventure so that the players can go, oh man, we have our goal of going back to town. Oh, let's go look and see if that merchant's okay that we helped when their cart had fallen over. Oh, or maybe the merchant seeks them out now because they helped them. Or maybe they robbed the merchant and now when they go back to town, they're wanted, right? This then makes the sandbox. The world's changing. Things are happening. They're always going to have things to interact with because every time they step out, 4, 5, 6, 10 things happen to them that could possibly be quests. They need to be logical. They need to make sense in your world. You need to kind of have them in the back of your head. It's not hard to do. You just keep it going, right? That's what we want to do, momentum. And the key here to make it a sandbox and not a railroad or not anything else is player agency. So agency is another one of those things we see bounced around a lot. But agency means to me that players can make the choice of what their characters do. They have choice. Now, their choice might lead them to a place where they've got no choice, right? They rob the merchant, they come back to town. Now they're surrounded by town guards with crossbows. They do have a choice, right? They could try to fight, but they might die. If they know they're overwhelmed, they might have to go to jail, right? And then you could say, well, that's not fair. Well, they made a choice to rob the merchant, right? This is the logical outcome of this. Hopefully they didn't do that. My players are generally on the lawful side, so we don't usually have that problem. But, hey, things happen. The idea here, though, is that now another campaign springs from it, right? Now they're outlaws on the run. There's lots of things. Again, that agency gave them a choice. You never want to put them into a position. And I'll give you an example from the first time I played D&D second time technically, but as an adult, and the first time I ever played 5th edition with the gentleman that kind of got me into it, but then only DM that one time. We all started the thing. They did exactly the thing we're talking about. You're in a town. What do you do? Okay, well, we go to a tavern. Everybody knows that. So we go to the tavern. We're in the tavern. The king's men come in. you have been conscripted to do this mission for blah, blah. We have? To what way? No, I don't want to do that. I have no interest in this king because I'd already set myself up as an outsider. You have to do it. What? No, I don't want to do it. Creates a fight. Now, you might say I was being a bad player at that point, but we had never discussed we were supposed to work for this king. I was just dropped into town and told, you're in a town. What am I supposed to do? But obviously, this dungeon master had a plan that we were supposed to go on this mission for the king. They could have solved the whole thing by just telling us that when we made our characters. We would have each had a reason to help on this mission, but they didn't. And I wasn't the only one. All the players were like, yeah, why are we doing this? Like, what's going on here? And it created a huge fight, and not fight amongst the players, but between us and the king's men, and we were able to get away. But again, we did it, and we weren't really supposed to have the agency. In fact, the dungeon master was like, I don't know what I'm going to do now because you didn't do the quest. Well, guess what? We did something else. Now we're wanted, I guess, right? But they ended up fading away and not playing with us anymore. So I don't know what that says. Maybe we burned them out. But my point being is that don't take away a player's agency, because if you do, they will fight back, or they won't care and they'll fade away. And that's kind of my final tip here. In order to make players active in your sandbox or open world or really any adventure, is you've got to put things in there that they care about. And when I say that, you could be from the backstory of the character, but I think it's more powerful, and I've said this before, when you put in things that the players care about. This is why it's much easier to run a big open world sandbox campaign with your friends versus at a game store, which different people every time. If you're doing that, then basically goals are very surface level, right? You're doing West Marches, which can be really fun with new people every week. Well, that's why those campaigns are go to the dungeon, get the treasure, come home. They're not deeply seated because I know my friends and I know what they will react to. And if I put those things in the world, I know they'll take the hooks. I can put 5 other hooks, but if I put a very specific hook, I know they'll take this one. And is that railroading them? Not really. They have the choice. I'm actually putting out what they want to do, and they can always say no. I never make it so that it doesn't happen. But let's say, for instance, they are your group loves animals. So you have one of the players rescues dogs, right? So if you make a situation in your campaign where dogs are being, used for fighting, or they've been taken away, or something's happening, that player will have a gut reaction to it and want to do it. So, and again, use this sparingly, but that's how you keep people interested. You put things in the game that they care about. They run into a certain situation, they want to solve it. They, as a player, want to solve it, because as much as we want to role play our characters, we're still people and we still believe certain things. And I've yet to meet somebody in a long-term campaign that ran a character that was wholeheartedly different than they really are. So maybe you have. Let me know. I'd love to hear the stories in the comments below. Let me know if this makes any sense, or if you still believe, no, players don't want that. They want to just be railroaded. Do you believe that railroad's what I'm saying, removing of agency? Do you like the idea of linear adventure? Is that really what you're talking about? They want linear adventures? Why? I'd love to know in the comments below. So, of course, if you want to get even deeper into the conversation, join my Discord. There's a link to that below as well. You can also check out my Patreon if you want to support the channels, and I'll talk to you soon.